Hi, this is Derek Triplett. I want to ask a question. Why do we hide bad news in our family? I saw a video that broke my heart. And this is a serious topic. There was a daughter, and she videotaped it. The daughter went to talk to her mom about the fact that her mom's boyfriend was visiting the daughter's room at night. And the mom's reaction was just terrible. It was egregious. The mom basically blamed the daughter. What did you do for him to be coming in your room? And then she said, this is a good man. He pays these bills, and went on. And now here's this daughter stuck with no outlet, even with her mom. What's interesting is that there are a lot of people who end up hiding what's happening to them in any situation: abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse. They're hiding what's happening to them because their loved ones won't listen. It's going to be very, very important that all of us in our families create space for somebody to give us bad news. It's very, very important that we are not so fragile that we can't hear something that has to be addressed, or it's going to change somebody else's life. So it's really, really, I beg of you, create a scenario where bad news is able to be accepted so that you don't allow somebody you love to suffer in silence.
Why are so many people hurting so badly? Make the relationship more important than the issue. Do you add value to the person that you're connected with? My name is Derek Triplett. This is Better Relationships. And guess what? It gets better from here. In the 1978 musical, The Wiz, there's this classic scene that everybody remembers who's ever seen it. It's Evelyn's sweatshop, and she comes bouncing in, and she tells all of her workers, don't nobody bring me no bad news. And she goes on to sing her song, and the lyrics say things like, when I wake up in the afternoon as I please to do, nobody bring me no bad news. I've already lit my fuse and I woke up negative, so nobody bring me any bad news. Is that the sentiment of many families, where people who have been hurt, children who have been molested, wives who are being abused, don't feel like they can bring their family any bad news? So they suffer in silence because there's no one to tell, because they don't want to disrupt the flow. That's what we're going to talk about today. Creating space for your family to communicate when there's bad news. This is Better Relationships. I'm Derek Triplett. Welcome back to Better Relationships. I'm Derek Triplett. So many people suffer in silence because they don't want to burden their loved ones. They try to control the outcome of the bad news. And if they can't control it, or they don't see it going well, they just keep it. And they keep it to their own detriment. How do we create space so that bad news can be communicated? And we've got back Dr. Janie Lacey, psychotherapist. Thank you so much for being here. We need your expertise on this one. So many people are suffering in silence, being abused and won't tell, children being molested, won't tell their parents. How do we start to eradicate that and build that space to communicate what's going on?
Well, there's lots of things that we can do, and shame is a deadly silent killer. So most people feel ashamed, or they feel like something they've done wrong, so contributes to whatever scenario situation they're in. So the best thing that we can start to do is have connection in our families, in our friendships, is to build connections and to build safety, because people will share and they'll communicate with you if you're approachable, if they feel safe with you, but also if they understand what they're feeling. And many times we can raise our children to be seen and not heard, right. And we don't tell them and we don't teach them emotional intelligence. So as adults, many times we see in our offices, adults don't even know what they feel. They can say, I feel okay, I feel happy. We feel on average 8 to 12 different feelings a day, and most people can't even name them, right? So when we create space and when we have that place, we have to have safety. There's a saying that I like that, intimacy is, I can take your weapons of self-destruction and I use it to protect you and not destroy you.
Wow.
And
Can
most
you say
people,
that again, please?
Yes. So intimacy is, I take your weapons of self-destruction and I use it to protect you and not destroy you. And many of us will have the experiences of the others. I tell you something bad about me or tell you something I've done, and then you shame me or you guilt me. If you're my parent or you're my friend, then what do? I'm not going to do that again. Then we learn to shut down. And when we learn to shut down, then we keep these things inside of us and we say, you know what? There's something wrong with me. Nobody's going to understand me. We have all these little bubbles over our head. Are people really going to be there for me? So then we suffer in silence. Then we feel shame. Shame is something is wrong with me.
Okay.
And guilt says I've done something wrong. And if you have the two of them together, it's really a deadly combination. That's why we have drug abuse. That's why we have a lot of sex addiction. We have non-relational relief is what we call it. Is we're going to go and we're going to find relief somewhere,
right,
but it's not going to be a person, right? And God has made us for relationships. So we have to have relationship relief. I need to be able to go to you as my friend, as my pastor, as my therapist, or whoever it may be, and be able to process in terms of a relationship.
Let's isolate some of the occurrences. For example, that mother who's in an abusive relationship and won't talk about it because she feels the shame and she feels the guilt, but there also may be financial pressures that she stays in it. How do we create that space? Who does she go to?
That's actually a common scenario, is that people are stuck, but they're also stuck psychologically. And we bring in all of our coping mechanisms, our family coping mechanisms, right in those moments of stuckness, so to speak. So if our family didn't talk about things, we're not going to talk about things. Or typically, this is a stereotypical situation, if the female is relying totally on the financial support of the male, then she's not going to disrupt her situation and then she'll suffer in silence. And sometimes people say, I will do it for the kids. So one of the things we can do as a community is to have safe havens. We have domestic violence shelters, we have outreach programs, we have free counseling at certain therapy centers. So there are resources there, but to get out and to say I need help, most people will do it as a last resort.
Is freedom then often more complicated than bondage?
Freedom is not usually an option in these situations because of the psychological bondage. It's something that we call trauma bond. So trauma bond means that I'm with you even though I know you can't love me, but I still can't leave you either. And most people find themselves in these traumatic bondage situations, or we call it also the Stockholm syndrome, is that I know I can't necessarily rely on you for certain things, but I'm still attached to you for whatever my psychological or basic needs for. So for some people it's money, for some people it's to make sure my kids are still going to school, or it's the roof over my head. So a lot of people from the outside is we judge people who stay in these abusive situations, but we don't understand the power of the psychological bondage or the psychological attachment in these situations. And some of them are very real, financially, or types of things that keep you in those situations, or the shame. If you have family members that say, well, I didn't like him anyway, and then now they find you in a domestic violence shelter, sometimes people don't even want to face that shame. We don't want to face the woman in the mirror.
I told you so, and I don't want to hear that from my family and the like.
And the best thing we can do in those situations is not say that. Is to say, I'm here, I support you, whatever you need, I love you, just to show people support. But people do those things from their own ego. Is to say, look, I told you I'm right, because we don't know how to really love and support people. And the best thing you could do is just be there with your presence when they're coming out of those situations. And not even bashing the other person or whoever they're in an abusive situation with. Is to say, I love you, I support you, how can I help you, what can I provide, take care of the children. It's just to provide support.
What happens with children? Let's shift, and these are difficult subjects, but let's shift to the issue of molestation. That daughter or that son who's being molested, especially when they have a single mom. And they don't want to put this pressure on the single mom. The boyfriend is visiting the room at night and they don't want to say anything. How do we create that space so that she doesn't have to, or he doesn't have to keep living this nightmare?
I think the first thing is we have to realize that molestation and sexual abuse is real and it's happening every day. 70% are people that you know. So it's not the grabbing person off the street, right? And 1 out of 3 girls will be sexually abused by the time that she's 18, and 1 out of 5 boys. So it's a very real conversation. But what tends to happen is similar in these abusive situations is the mom may know there's intuitive nature, because many times I can have women who are now talking about their sexual molestation as a young girl, and I told my mom, but she told me I was lying, or she told me I was hot, whatever it may be, and then they carry the shame and guilt, and now there's a grown woman who now has all these things that she's holding inside of her because she was placed, a label was placed on her as a young age. So the best thing that we can do is for our children is to teach them to have a voice, but you have to be a healthy parent to do that. So even going into our schools, we like to educate our schools. I go and talk about the hooking up culture.
Right.
But when we go in there, we talk about giving people a voice and having them the opportunity to say no, consent, those types of things. But it's very difficult when you're not even safe in your own home. It's very difficult.
But depending on the generation,
Yes.
the kid having a voice seems to change. Baby boomers in raising their kids didn't have voices.
Right.
And so if that is perpetuated from generation to generation, how do we create that voice?
So first thing is we like to do is educate those baby boomers,
Right.
right, and talk about the devastating effects by not being able to teach our children to be, because you want your child to grow up to be a lawyer or a doctor,
right?
So we can use those types of dreams that you have for your children, and they can't get there if they don't know emotional intelligence. And
But on the flip side of I want you to be a lawyer or a doctor, what happens in my house stays in my house.
Exactly.
And if you weren't so fast, this wouldn't happen.
Contradicting messages, constant. So then what we can do is we can't necessarily control things in the home, but we as a community, whether it's in schools, whether it's after school programs, they're going to be coming in contact with people all the time. I know my home, we were not to say anything. My dad was a typical children are to be seen and not heard, but I had a pharmacist who would pour into me when I would go to the drugstore with my mom, or I had coaches, those types of things. So every single person has to know that they have empowerment, and we make a difference in whatever child we come across, because we don't know what's going on in people's homes. Absolutely not. But we know when they're acting out. When kids act bad, it's usually because they feel bad. But what we try to do is we try to fix the behavioral problem and try to make that go away, versus digging deep and understanding why are they even acting that way.
So I saw a report recently, and we've seen them over and over again, another child committing suicide because they were being bullied.
Yes.
Are those things being talked about? Mom, Dad, I'm being bullied. Now, if I went home and said I'm being bullied as a third grader, fourth grader, it was simple, fight back. But it's different now, and why is it different, and what can we do so that kids can say, hey, I'm starting to feel a certain way because of what's happening to me?
Well, I may ruffle some feathers here, but the first thing is, as parents, and I'm making a very general statement, is that we have to become more connected. We are more disconnected than ever. The parents are looking at their phone, mom, you have to call me 3 times before I realize you're calling me, right? So we're so disconnected even in our own homes. So to be connected with our families, that means we're going to be in tune with our children. They're going to be safe to us to come and say, this is going on, versus everyone is going to get bullied. I hear more times than not parents say that, but that is true. Right now, because of social media, every single child under the age 18 will have a bullying experience. So we know that that's going to happen. But according to the child's resiliency, their emotional stability and regulation, how people handle that, how the children handle that is going to be different. But if a child is more vulnerable, he's coming from a home where they're not connected with their parents, there's no safety there. So I'm feeling like there's no hope, because usually they start feeling like there's no hope. They start withdrawing. So most parents can look back and say, I seen the signs, but I didn't realize those were the signs.
When we come back, I want to talk about fragile people, and how sometimes when you're in relationships with fragile people, you don't tell them truth, and ultimately you end up suffering in the relationship. We'll be right back on Better Relationships. Let's head back to the Better Relationships Q&A corner. Here's a question from Lisa from Dallas. I stopped speaking with my dad 10 years ago because he said something that was so painful and hurtful. I walked away from him. It's been 10 years. I've moved on, gotten married, and I have a 5-year-old. My 5-year-old is asking for grandpa and grandma, what's the best approach? Wow, Lisa, it's been 10 years. It's time. I wish I could tell you that you're going to feel better about it initially, but you won't. But the relationships have to matter more than the issue. Do it for yourself. Don't do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. You and your father need that reconciliation. Now, here's some of the things that can help you reconcile. Number one, admit that it hurts, which you have. But secondly, admit that everybody deserves forgiveness, especially your dad. Forgive. Decide that I want to forgive. Also, decide that the context in which the injury happened, you'll never be able to go back and erase it. Some people only are able to forgive if they're able to erase and eliminate what happened. You're not going to be able to erase it. It hurt you. You've got to overcome that and recognize that, guess what? It's worth it because that's your dad, and it's worth it because it's your child's grandfather. Get it done. It'll matter. You can do it. It may do a little bit to your ego at first, because a lot of times we hold out forgiving because we don't want the other person to feel like they got the best of us. Guess what? Throw away the issue, concentrate on the relationship. Thanks, Lisa. Welcome back to Better Relationships. I'm Derek Tripler. We're talking to Dr. Jamie Lacey about creating space to talk about what needs to be talked about because I'm hurting. I'm hurting, I'm being hurt, I need to tell somebody, but I don't feel like I can tell my mom or I can tell my spouse. Fragile people who come across as emotionally hypersensitive, so I don't, if I'm in a relationship with an emotionally hypersensitive person, there's certain things I don't say because I don't want to hurt your feelings. And so you can end up suffering in a relationship because you can't articulate your own pain.
That's very common, actually. So what happens is when people don't know how to regulate their emotions, they'll go through 0 to 10. 0 says, I'm shut down if you give me feedback, or 10 says, I'm raging, or I'm giving you the hammer. So when you're in a relationship with that person, it's really hard because they're wanting you to have intimacy with them, but literally you're seeing a hammer.
Right.
So, when you have those types of situations, having a lot of empathy, because it's usually not about you, you're just what activates it. People, we all bring our baggage to the relationship. So that baggage, we're either going to be reactors or actors. Actors know how to regulate their feelings, so I can take your criticism, I can process it, and I can think about it. But a reactor says, if you tell me anything that makes me feel bad, or you criticize me or feel judged, I'm going to immediately react because I cannot contain feeling bad. And healthy relationships, the good and the bad stays together. That means that I can be upset with you, but I still love you, and that can still exist in the same place. When people are overly sensitive, we call it splitting. They split. It's either good or bad.
Wow.
So when you're coming to them and you're giving them something that's critical, they're going into that bad category, and they feel all bad and they can't contain it, which is why they react. But if you're in a relationship with them, you're just thinking, geez, I'm not going to do that again. So then you learn to start hiding, and it's the mold behind the wall that'll eventually come down. Because the number one way that we predict relationship demise, when we look at relationships, is avoidance. It's not that you have an affair or financial ruin. It's how much is the pattern in the relationship where you avoid dealing with conflict, problems, dealing with honesty, and being authentic. Eventually, at some point, the wall is going to come down. So teaching people those conflict resolution skills has to deal with what the coping mechanisms and the emotional regulation that each person brings to the table. Because you can be in a relationship, so if you're a male in a relationship, you can be in a relationship with a 14-year-old girl emotionally, right?
Yes.
So she's going to be reactive. So maturity says that I can hear your conflicts with me, I can hear your judgments or whatever that may be. It may not feel good, and if I'm not in the right state of mind, because I'm going into fight or flight, our brain literally will go into fight or flight, I can say, you know what, let me think about that and I'll get back to you. That's maturity. The other part is I'm going to go, the immature is going to be defensive. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm now going to flip it and turn it on you. We were talking about me. The smoke screen is now we're talking about you.
Well, what did you do?
Exactly. And then that's where the safety in the relationship is eroded.
The avoidance issue becomes a cancer. It becomes a termite. And eventually, that's that proverbial person who just goes to the store and never comes back because they can't take it anymore. One of the things I try to say to people is that if you can't bring the whole you to the relationship, whatever part of you that you can't is still single. And so how do we deal with the issue of being able to have those difficult conversations and make sure that when we have them, we're not doing further damage?
And the first thing is a lot of people are in denial of their own stuff that they bring to the relationship, so that makes it even harder to have those conversations. But the best thing, if people want to have difficult conversations with their loved ones, I'm always a big believer in the sandwich approach, right?
Okay.
It takes 8 compliments to every negative thing that you say. So if you said one not negative thing to your spouse, it's going to take 8 compliments to kind of make that not have as much power.
That's a huge ratio.
That's a huge ratio, which a lot of people don't realize that. So if you're negative and you're constantly beating down your spouse, and now you want to go and have a deep conversation, their threshold for that is going to be very low. So the best thing that you can do before you have that conversation is give them the bank, give them the deposits in the bank, so to speak. Make sure that they know that you love them.
You can't make a withdrawal.
Exactly. You will be negative.
8 to 1. 8
Yes.
to 1.
Yes.
And so, see, somebody's going to be walking around, okay, I get to 6, 7, 8. Now I can tell you. How do we make sure that that becomes more organic?
You know, it's so easy to point out what we don't like about people or what we want to improve. So the organicness has to be us, right? We want to be more positive than you are negative, especially in a relationship context, because you're bringing that energy to the relationship.
Right.
So they're 80% to 20%. 80% that person needs to have enough of the good stuff that even made you attracted to them that it's going to work. There's always going to be 20%.
Right.
There's always going to be 20%. So you focus on the good stuff. You make sure that you're feeding their bank every day, but then you also communicate what you need. Because sometimes people feel like she's always negative about me. She's always proving me, always telling me what I'm not doing right. Well, then tell her, I really need to hear the things that you enjoy about me or you like about me. But they just hold it inside, which again is the safety. If we don't have safety in a relationship or that emotional holding space, you're going to exist with each other and you're going to avoid each other, but you're not going to live with each other.
Wow. I wish I could talk about this another 15, 20 minutes. I know you're saying she didn't have enough time. I know we're going to have to bring her back. I know. Listen, this is Better Relationships. Make space for those difficult times. We'll be right back in a minute. Welcome back to Better Relationships. In every family, some bad things are going to happen. Somebody's going to get hurt. There's going to be some kind of difficulty. And those conversations have to be had. Create space in your family to talk about those things that are difficult. Can I ask you to do something? And I normally don't make any demands on the audience, but can I ask all of us, grow up. We have to grow up and mature so that we can effectively manage conflict so that people don't have to suffer in silence. Talk to your children. Let them know that if there's something going on with you, I want to know as your parent. Talk to your spouse. Let them know if there's something that's not going right, something I need to do better, something that hurts you, I want to know. Let's have the difficult conversation. Don't be Eveline. Don't nobody bring me no bad news. No, bring me the bad news. With God and the help of professionals, we'll deal with it. I'm Derek Triplett. This is Better Relationships. And guess what? It gets better from here. My work is not possible without the support of a tremendous family. We are not a perfect family. We have our scars and our stains. But being a triplet is a great honor to me, and I take pride in it. I want to thank my wife, my children, my parents, and my brother and sisters for their support and their encouragement. I also have some close friends who really want to see me win. I want to thank them for helping to keep me going. Without them, I couldn't be here for you.